All right, so next up, we've got Haylee, who's a PhD student. They're going with an interesting project, an interesting... She'll talk super loud so everybody can hear her.
I've been told I have a small voice. I don't believe it. It sounds very loud in my head. Okay, thanks. So yeah, my name's Haylee. I'm one of the PhD students with Dave, and I have a background in invasion ecology. So should I stand closer? I have a background in invasion ecology. So I worked in applied ecology for quite a few years, and back then it became a bit trendy to consider the social human dimensions of invasion science. So I got really interested in that, and then I decided I should probably figure out how to do it properly, so I started doing a PhD with Dave. And so yeah, my PhD is about how people perceive this concept of nativeness. So I'm pretty confident that most people here know what a native and a non-native species are. Does anyone want me to explain? No. But I think that we often think of nativeness as an innate trait that comes with the species. But that's not necessarily true, well, it's not true. Our idea of categorizing or classifying species as native or non-native is a human construct, and it's formed based on our own human values. So I guess I'm interested in why maybe we give native species preferential treatment. Why do people think of native species as morally superior, or why do people have strong likes and dislikes for species based on whether they are just based on whether they are native or not? So that's really what I'm interested in this PhD, is what nativeness really means to people. Oh, no, I'm doing it here, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I'm skipping a few things. So I've chosen to situate my study in cities. And the reason for this is because this is where people are most likely to experience or interact with native and non-native species in their everyday lives. And the other thing with cities is that we actually, unlike other types of land uses, we actually rely on non-native species to be in our environment to provide us with a range of ecosystem services like cooling and aesthetics and carbon sequestration and food. So if we say we want to design urban spaces that meet the needs and preferences of a diverse group, a diverse population, then I think that we need to take into account people's understandings and preferences around the native and non-native species in the urban environment. So this first part of my PhD is a qualitative look at nativeness and how people conceptualize nativeness. So based on a review and analysis of the literature and a series of interviews that I've been conducting with people here in Hobart, we can start to see how nativeness is actually a multi-dimensional concept. And that means that it's a complex of ideas that people draw on when they're creating or assigning meaning to native or non-native species. And similar to what Sasha was explaining, we can describe the dimensions of nativeness by looking at the themes in the qualitative data. So there's 6 main themes or dimensions of nativeness. I'll just go through them very quickly. The first one is belonging. These are in no particular order, but the first one is belonging. And this is the idea that, well, people have a sense that species have a right place and a wrong place to exist. And often native species are considered more ecologically acceptable or legitimate than non-native species. People are also aware of humans' role in moving and introducing species And this often creates some sense of guilt or environmental responsibility and a desire to maintain natural order. There are also concepts of risk and detrimental impacts, and these are usually associated with non-nativeness. Mostly these would be impacts to human activities, but people also talk about non-native species displacing native species as being a big impact. There's also this idea of species, native species being more environmentally compatible. That is the ability of species to survive and thrive in the environment that they're in. And then there's the usefulness and desirability of species. So do native or novel species provide some sort of amenity to people in cities? And then lastly, there's this sense of place and connection that people often associate with native species. We often form our identities, part of our identities, or at least some form of familiarity in a place based on the native fauna and flora in that space. So taken together, this kind of multifaceted way of thinking about how people perceive nativeness can help us understand why people have different attitudes, different preferences when it comes to native and non-native species. So I've started in the next part of my PhD looking at this from a more quantitative approach. So watch this space for updates.